The headline wrote itself. A federal judge in a tuxedo handcuffed in a parking lot on his daughter's wedding day for no lawful reason whatsoever. The footage was devastating. It showed every second. Pruitt's initial approach, the demand to move along, the false report to dispatch, the handcuffing of a calm and cooperative man, and most damningly, the moment when the venue coordinator told Pruitt exactly who he had in handcuffs, and Pruitt chose to continue anyway. Type accountability in the comments if you believe this officer needed to face every consequence that was coming. Pruitt's employment record surfaced within 48 hours. What investigators and journalists found was not a surprise to anyone who had worked near him. In 9 years on the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, Pruitt had accumulated 16 formal citizen complaints. 13 of those involved Black residents. 11 involved stops, detentions, or confrontations in neighborhoods or venues that were predominantly white or upper income. The pattern was textbook, documented, and impossible to explain away. In 2019, a Black businessman had been detained outside a downtown Charlotte hotel where he was staying as a guest. He filed a complaint. The department noted it and moved on. In 2021, a Black physician was stopped in a parking deck near a hospital and questioned for 15 minutes before being allowed to proceed. She filed a complaint. A supervisor reviewed it and filed it away. In 2022, a retired Black school teacher was told to leave a public park during a family reunion picnic and was briefly detained when she questioned the order. 3 complaints in 1 incident. Nothing happened. The department had flagged Pruitt's record twice for additional bias training. He completed the training both times and returned to exactly the same behavior. Nobody escalated. Nobody acted. The system kept extending rope until Pruitt finally used all of it. Federal Judge Okafor gave a single interview to a national outlet the Tuesday following the incident. He was measured, precise, and devastating. He said he had spent 31 years inside the American legal system and that he believed deeply in what that system could be. He said that what happened to him in that parking lot was not new. It was not unusual. It was something that happened every day to Black men who had no federal credentials to eventually save them. He said the only reason anyone was paying attention was because of who he was. And he said that was the problem, not the solution. He said he thought about every Black man who had been where he stood, confused, handcuffed, trying to stay calm while someone with authority and a weapon decided who belonged somewhere and who didn't. He said he thought about them by name, because he had presided over cases where being in the wrong place, looking the wrong way to the wrong officer, had cost people their freedom or their lives. The interview was watched 42 million times. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department placed Pruitt on administrative leave within 72 hours of the incident. The union released a statement about officers making difficult real-time assessments in complex situations. That statement was ratioed into oblivion on every platform it appeared on, and the union quietly stopped defending him within a week. The district attorney's office announced a formal review for criminal charges 6 days after the incident. 3 weeks later, charges were filed. Darren Pruitt was charged with 3 counts: unlawful detention under color of law, filing a false official report to law enforcement dispatch, and civil rights deprivation under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, a federal civil rights statute that carries significant prison exposure when violations are willful and documented. Each count on its own would have ended a career. Together, they represented the comprehensive destruction of his professional life and posed a real possibility of federal incarceration. Pruitt's defense team argued that he had acted in good faith on the information available to him and that his actions, while perhaps overzealous, did not rise to the level of criminal conduct. They argued that the arrest was made in the course of his official duties and that his subjective belief in the lawfulness of his actions should shield him from criminal liability. That argument collapsed on the second day of trial when prosecutors played the venue security footage in real time and paused it at the moment Sandra Fitch told Pruitt exactly who Reginald Okafor was, and showed Pruitt choosing to continue the arrest anyway. No good faith belief survives the moment you are told on camera by a credible witness the exact identity of the person you are arresting, and you proceed anyway. The defense then tried to argue that Pruitt could not be certain Fitch's identification was reliable. That argument collapsed when prosecutors called Hartley to the stand. She testified with unambiguous clarity that she had verbally told Pruitt to stop and that he had refused. She said she had never in her career witnessed a colleague continue an arrest after being presented with contradicting identification from multiple sources. She said she had filed her own internal report the night of the incident because she understood immediately that what she had witnessed was wrong. If you have made it this far in this story, you are the kind of person this channel exists for. Please subscribe and share this video, because stories like this one need more people to see them. The trial lasted 4 days. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 11 minutes. Guilty on all 3 counts. Pruitt sat very still as the verdict was read. The only visible reaction was that he blinked more slowly than usual. The blink of a man trying to hold himself together in a room full of cameras. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. The federal judge presiding over the sentencing, not Judge Okafor, who had recused himself entirely from any legal proceedings connected to the case, acknowledged Pruitt's 9 years of service, but spent considerably more time addressing the 16 complaints, the documented pattern, and the decision to continue an unlawful arrest after being told in clear terms who he was arresting. 22 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, permanent revocation of his law enforcement certification in the state of North Carolina, with a national flag that would follow him to any jurisdiction where he sought future employment in law enforcement. He would never wear a badge again. The civil lawsuit was filed separately by Judge Okafor and his family. It named Darren Pruitt individually, the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department, and the City of Charlotte. The complaint detailed the unlawful detention, the emotional and dignitary harms of being handcuffed on his daughter's wedding day, the irreplaceable nature of the moment that was disrupted, and the broader pattern of departmental negligence in allowing Pruitt to accumulate 16 complaints without meaningful consequence. The jury awarded $12.4 million, $4 million in compensatory damages, including a specific award for the irreplaceable dignitary harm of the wedding day disruption. $8.4 million in punitive damages against the department and city for deliberate indifference to a known pattern of civil rights violations. The City of Charlotte's taxpayers would fund that judgment. The price of 9 years of looking the other way. Pruitt was formally terminated from the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department before his sentencing. His pension was revoked under state law provisions that allow forfeiture upon felony conviction for conduct committed while on duty. He was 34 years old and had no professional identity outside law enforcement. Now he had a federal conviction on his record, a name that returned 47 million search results, and a permanent prohibition on the only career he had ever pursued. His personal life deteriorated under the weight of it. Friends inside the department distanced themselves. His marriage did not survive the year following the conviction. He had to relocate twice because of public recognition and confrontations in his neighborhood. These were not things Reginald Okafor asked for. They were not things his family celebrated. They were simply the natural consequence of choices Pruitt made over 9 years, and then once more in a parking lot on a June afternoon. The Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department entered into a consent decree with the U.S. Department of Justice following a pattern and practice investigation triggered directly by the incident. The investigation, which examined the department's complaint procedures, disciplinary history, and use of force patterns, confirmed what the 16 complaints had already suggested. The problem was systemic, not isolated. The consent decree required an overhaul of the complaint review process, with an independent civilian oversight board given real authority to review, investigate, and recommend discipline on all use of force and civil rights complaints. It required mandatory body camera activation protocols with consequences for non-compliance. It required annual bias training with ongoing evaluation metrics. It required mandatory intervention training so that officers in Hartley's position would have both the authority and the expectation to stop an unlawful action by a colleague. 3 supervisors who had reviewed Pruitt's previous complaints and declined to escalate also faced consequences. 2 were demoted. 1 was reassigned to a non-supervisory administrative role. The department issued a public acknowledgement, not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement, that the pattern should have been addressed years before it culminated in a parking lot outside a wedding venue. Officer Hartley, for her part, received a formal commendation for her conduct during and after the incident. She was the only officer on scene that day who behaved as she was trained to behave. Her testimony during the criminal trial was described by legal observers as among the most credible and consistent they had seen in a civil rights case in years. Aaliyah Okafor and her husband gave their own interview 6 months after the wedding. They talked about what it was like to learn during the cocktail hour what had happened to her father. She said she looked at the video and then looked across the room at her father dancing with her mother, and she thought about how close it had come to being different. She said she was grateful he had made it inside. She said she was angry that it was something to be grateful for. The story of what happened outside the Belmont Grand is not really about one officer at a wedding venue on a Saturday afternoon. It is about what gets allowed to accumulate when institutions treat complaints as paperwork and patterns as personality quirks. 16 complaints, 13 involving Black residents, years of nothing, until finally the nothing ran out. Reginald Okafor never asked to be the face of this conversation. He was a man in a tuxedo trying to walk his daughter down the aisle. But his experience became something larger, not because of who he was, but because of the precise, terrible clarity with which it illustrated what so many Black Americans navigate every day with far less protection, far less documentation, and far fewer people watching. Consider the full weight of that. A man with 31 years on the federal bench, a man who had sat in judgment of the justice system itself for over 3 decades, was handcuffed in a parking lot because an officer saw a Black man in a well-dressed neighborhood and decided, before a single word was exchanged, that something must be wrong. All the credentials in the world did not protect him. They only helped him afterward. If you find yourself in a situation like this, document everything you can safely document. Stay calm. Do not resist physically, even if the detention is unlawful. Your safety is more important than winning the moment. Get names, badge numbers, the names of witnesses. File formal complaints through every available channel. Consult an attorney. And understand that your account of what happened matters and deserves to be heard, regardless of whether you have a title after your name. The truth that Reginald's case made impossible to ignore is this. The protection that your credentials eventually afforded him is not available to most people. The 4 cameras that saved him are not always rolling. The witnesses with phones are not always in the parking lot. The Hartley who pushes back is not always there. That is the gap between justice as it exists in this story and justice as it exists in the world. And closing that gap is the only work that actually matters. Darren Pruitt walked toward a man in a tuxedo and saw something that was not there. He saw a problem. He saw a person who needed to be managed. He saw someone who did not belong. He saw all of this before he said a single word, before he learned a single fact, before he gave anyone a single moment to be anything other than what he had already decided they were. He was wrong. And that wrongness cost him everything, while a federal judge dried his eyes and danced with his daughter at her reception. Justice is not guaranteed. It requires evidence and courage, and people willing to stand in parking lots with their phones out and officers like Hartley who know when to say stop, and jurors willing to deliberate and decide. When all of those things come together at once, justice is possible. This time, it arrived. $12.4 million in 22 months and a badge that will never be worn again. And one father who made it down the aisle, 4 minutes late, boutonniere slightly bent, dignity entirely intact. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. It genuinely means something that you stayed for this story. Make sure you are subscribed so you never miss the next one. We cover stories like this every week, and they deserve every set of eyes we can get. Now tell me this in the comments. What was the moment in this story that hit you hardest? Was it the parking lot, the handcuffs, the 4-minute margin, or the 42 million people who watched a judge tell the truth about what his title could and could not protect him from? Let me know below. You need to move along, sir. This is a private event space. Officer, I am the father of the bride. My daughter's wedding is in 40 minutes. I don't have you on the guest list. I'm going to need some ID. My name is Reginald Okafor. I suggest you speak with the venue coordinator before this gets a lot more complicated for you. I don't take suggestions from people loitering outside a building. Turn around. Walk away. Right now. Sir, I'm telling you for the last time. You don't want to do this. Are you threatening a police officer? I'm warning one. The parking lot security camera outside the Belmont Grand in Charlotte, North Carolina, captured every second of what happened at 2:17 p.m. on a Saturday in June. A tall black man in his early 60s stood on the front steps of the venue in a charcoal tuxedo, a white boutonniere pinned to his lapel, a handkerchief tucked in his breast pocket. He was calm, upright, and unhurried. He had nowhere else to be. His daughter's wedding began at 3 o'clock, and he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Officer Darren Pruitt had been patrolling the Belmont Grand's parking area as part of an event security contract. When he spotted Reginald standing near the entrance, something shifted in his expression. He walked over with purpose, his jaw set, his hand drifting toward his belt. He did not ask if the man needed help. He did not greet him at all. He simply told him to move along. What Darren Pruitt did not know in that moment was that he had just made the worst mistake of his entire career. A decision that would cost him his job, his freedom, and 11 years of everything he had built, and expose a pattern of conduct that the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department should have shut down a very long time ago. The security camera was rolling. A bystander had already pulled out a phone, and a man who had spent 31 years on the federal bench was about to stop being patient. Before we get into what happened next, I want to know where you are watching this from. Drop your city or state in the comments right now. And if you are new to this channel, please hit that subscribe button. This story only gets more powerful from here, and you are going to want to see it through. The Honorable Reginald A. Okafor had served as a United States Federal District Court judge for the Western District of North Carolina for 14 years. Before that, he spent 17 years as a federal prosecutor, including 6 years as an assistant United States attorney and 4 as the lead prosecutor in a landmark civil rights corruption case that sent 3 sitting elected officials to federal prison. He had clerked for a Circuit Court of Appeals judge right out of Howard University School of Law, where he graduated second in his class. He had testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee twice. He had been cited in more than 200 published legal opinions. Reginald Okafor knew the law the way a carpenter knows wood, every grain of it, every knot. Off the bench, he was the kind of man who remembered the names of parking garage attendants and asked about their children. He volunteered twice a month with a legal literacy program at a community center in West Charlotte. He coached youth basketball for 11 years until his knees gave out. He had been married to the same woman, Deborah, for 38 years. And on this particular Saturday in June, all he wanted to do was walk his daughter, Aaliyah, down the aisle and try not to cry. That morning, he had driven himself to the Belmont Grand early to make sure the florist had used the right lilies. He parked his car, straightened his tie in the rearview mirror, and stepped out into a warm June afternoon, fully prepared for the best day of the year, simple, quiet, and deeply personal. Nothing about it was supposed to be difficult. Officer Pruitt approached the front steps of the Belmont Grand at 2:17 p.m. He was in full uniform, working the event security contract the department occasionally fulfilled for private venues. He was 34 years old and had been on the force for 9 years. He walked toward Reginald with his shoulders squared and his chin forward, as if he had already decided what kind of interaction this was going to be. He did not introduce himself. He did not say good afternoon. He told Reginald he needed to move along, that this was a private event space. Reginald looked at him steadily and explained that he was the father of the bride and that the wedding was in 40 minutes. His tone was even and clear. He spoke the way a man speaks when he is used to being heard in large rooms. Pruitt said he did not have him on any guest list. He asked for identification. Now, there was no guest list at the door. Not at 2:17 in the afternoon, 40 minutes before a ceremony. The wedding coordinator was inside finalizing seating arrangements. There were no other guests arriving yet. Reginald was simply standing near the entrance to the building he was about to enter as the father of the bride. Pruitt had no reason, no legitimate reason, to stop him at all. But there it was, the question that told Reginald everything. Pruitt asked what Reginald was doing standing around outside. The implication hung in the warm June air like something sour. A black man in a tuxedo, standing outside an upscale event venue in a predominantly white part of Charlotte. And the question was not, "Can I help you, sir?" It was, "What are you doing here?" Reginald kept his voice level. He gave Pruitt his name. He explained again that his daughter was getting married inside this building and that he was here as her father. He told Pruitt, with quiet precision, that he might want to speak with the venue coordinator before proceeding any further. Pruitt's response was to step closer. He told Reginald that he did not take direction from people loitering on private property and that if Reginald could not produce identification, he was going to need to leave the premises. Reginald did not raise his voice. He did not gesture aggressively. He told Officer Pruitt, for the last time, he said calmly, that he did not want to do this. A warning, delivered with the composure of a man who had spent 3 decades in federal courtrooms. Not a threat, a simple statement of fact from someone who already knew how this was going to end. Pruitt took it as a challenge. He told Reginald to turn around and walk away, or he was going to be detained. Inside the Belmont Grand, Reginald's wife Deborah was helping Aaliyah into her dress. His son Marcus was coordinating with the groomsmen. The wedding photographer was walking the grounds. Nobody inside yet knew that Reginald was standing in the parking lot being told to leave his own daughter's wedding. Reginald did not walk away. He stood his ground, calmly, hands visible, body language open, and stated clearly that he was not going to leave his daughter's wedding and that Pruitt had no lawful basis to detain him. Pruitt's voice went up a notch. He told Reginald he was obstructing him and that if Reginald did not comply immediately, he would be placed under arrest. A woman named Terry Lawson had just pulled into the parking lot. She was a family friend arriving early for the ceremony. She heard the raised voices, looked over, and immediately reached for her phone. What she saw was a well-dressed older black man in a tuxedo, hands at his sides, speaking calmly, and a uniformed officer getting louder and more aggressive by the second. Terry started recording before she even got out of her car. Her footage would later show what happened next. Pruitt stepped forward and grabbed Reginald's arm. He told him he was being detained for failure to identify and obstruction. Reginald told him clearly, in precise legal language, that he did not consent to a physical detention, that he had already provided his name and a lawful reason for his presence, and that this contact was unlawful. He kept his hands visible. He did not pull away. Pruitt put him in handcuffs anyway. This was Pruitt's second massive mistake, and the consequences were already compounding. Type "disgraceful" in the comments right now if you cannot believe what you are hearing. And have you or someone you know ever been stopped like this? Judged for simply being somewhere you had every right to be? Drop your answer below. Two other event guests arrived in the parking lot within the next 3 minutes. Both pulled out phones. The Belmont Grand had its own exterior security cameras covering the front entrance from two separate angles. Terry's footage, the arriving guests' footage, and both venue cameras were all capturing a man in a tuxedo being handcuffed in a parking lot 40 minutes before his daughter's wedding. Pruitt called for backup. The information he gave dispatch was false. He reported a non-cooperative individual refusing to identify himself and potentially trespassing on private property at the Belmont Grand. Anyone watching any one of 4 active cameras could see that this was a fabrication. Reginald had given his name. He had explained his presence. He had done nothing except refuse to leave his own daughter's wedding. While he stood there in handcuffs, Reginald could hear the music starting inside for the pre-ceremony. The string quartet was warming up. Aaliyah was 28 minutes away from walking down the aisle, expecting her father to be at the end of it. That was Pruitt's third mistake. Not just detaining a federal judge illegally, doing it in the middle of something irreplaceable and destroying a moment that could never be given back. A second officer arrived. Officer Vanessa Hartley, 6 years on the force. She took one look at the situation, and something immediately felt wrong. She saw a man in formal attire, clearly dressed for a wedding, speaking calmly and coherently to a colleague who was significantly more agitated than the man he had in handcuffs. She asked Pruitt quietly what the basis for the detention was. Pruitt said the man had refused to identify himself and was being belligerent. Hartley looked at Reginald. He was not belligerent. He was composed in a way that honestly seemed almost impossible given the circumstances. He looked at her and gave her his full name, his home address, the name of the event, the name of his daughter, and the name of the venue coordinator who could verify everything he was saying in under 60 seconds. Hartley's expression shifted. She looked back at Pruitt. Then she looked at the 4 people with phones out in the parking lot. Then she looked at the man in the tuxedo with the white boutonniere and the handcuffs. She asked Pruitt whether he had contacted anyone inside the venue. He had not. Hartley suggested they call the venue coordinator immediately. Pruitt told her they were handling it his way and to follow his lead. This was the moment everything shifted, not yet toward justice, but toward the point of no return. Pruitt, incredibly, told Reginald he was under arrest, formal arrest. He cited obstruction and failure to comply with lawful commands. He began walking Reginald toward his patrol vehicle. The cameras captured every step. Inside the Belmont Grand, a staff member at the front desk had watched through the glass doors for several minutes. She walked back through the venue to find the coordinator. The coordinator, a woman named Sandra Fitch, was in the middle of final preparations for the ceremony. When the staff member told her there was a police situation in the parking lot involving the father of the bride, Sandra went pale. She walked quickly to the front of the building. What she saw when she pushed open the front doors was Reginald Okafor being guided toward a police cruiser in handcuffs, while his son Marcus, who had seen the commotion from an upstairs window, came sprinting down the front steps in his groomsman's suit. Marcus was shouting. His voice cracked. He told the officers that was his father, that was the federal judge, and that if they put him in that car, they were making the biggest mistake of their lives. Pruitt told Marcus to back up or he would be detained as well. Hartley stepped in front of Marcus. She held up her hand, not to threaten him, but to slow everything down. She looked at Pruitt and said, loudly enough that everyone in the parking lot heard it clearly, "Darren, stop. We need to verify this right now." Pruitt did not stop. Do you think Hartley should have physically intervened to stop Pruitt? Tell me your thoughts. What would you have done in her position? Sandra Fitch walked directly up to Pruitt and told him that the man in handcuffs was Judge Reginald Okafor, the father of the bride, and that she had personally confirmed his identity on the event guest list when he arrived 40 minutes ago. She asked him, her voice shaking, to please remove the handcuffs. Pruitt looked at her. He looked at Reginald. He looked at the phones in every direction. And then, instead of stopping, he told Sandra that this was a police matter and that she needed to step back. That was the moment it became completely unforgivable. Hartley made the call herself. She contacted dispatch and requested an immediate identity verification on Reginald A. Okafor, Federal District Court Judge, Western District of North Carolina. The response came back in 41 seconds. Confirmed. Active federal judge, Western District, North Carolina. No warrants, no priors, no flags of any kind. Pruitt was still holding Reginald by the arm when the confirmation came through. Hartley told him, flat and quiet, "Take them off, Darren. Right now." For a long moment, Pruitt stood absolutely still. The arrogance did not drain out of his face slowly. It left all at once, replaced by something that looked a great deal like a man watching a door close that he was never going to be able to reopen. He removed the handcuffs. Reginald stood in the parking lot, straightened his jacket, adjusted his boutonniere, which had been bent during the arrest, and looked at Pruitt with an expression that people who were there later described as the most controlled display of composure they had ever witnessed from any human being. He did not raise his voice. He did not curse. He asked Pruitt for his full name, badge number, and the name of his commanding officer. He took out his phone and noted the time, 2:44 p.m. Then he asked Sandra Fitch if he still had time to walk his daughter down the aisle. He did, by 4 minutes. But even in that moment, Pruitt could not simply accept what had happened. He told Reginald, and the cameras caught every word, that he had been acting within his lawful authority and that Reginald had created an unnecessary confrontation. He said it like a man still trying to talk himself off a ledge. Hartley stared at him. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Marcus took his father by the arm and walked him inside. The parking lot full of phone cameras and witnesses watched them go. Sandra Fitch followed them in, already dialing the venue manager. Terry Lawson stood by her car, phone still recording, tears on her face. Reginald Okafor walked his daughter down the aisle at 2:58 p.m. He straightened his jacket one more time at the top of the steps, took Aaliyah's arm, and walked her to her future. He did not tell her what had happened until after the reception. She found out when a guest showed her the footage on their phone during the cocktail hour. Terry Lawson posted her video that evening with a full written account of what she had witnessed. By midnight Saturday, it had been viewed 1.4 million times. By Sunday morning, 6.7 million. By Monday afternoon, the story was on every major national news network.